good day to you all. We welcome today Elliot Brown and Rob Allen from Victito. They're going to tell us about themselves and also about the business and how that business can help you. So if we go around the room first, and I'll give you both a chance to say who you are, what you do, and why you with Victito. Who would like to start?
Shall I kick off, Elliot? Yeah, as you've heard, I'm Rob Allen. My professional background has always been in HR, so I've had 40 years in HR and over 30 as an HR director. I've also I also work for the employment tribunals. I'm a non-legal member. I've done that for about 28 years. And I also sit on a number of regulatory bodies for teachers and nursing and midwifery staff. In terms of my professional leaning, if you like, it's always been towards employment law, although I've got degrees not only in employment law, but also medical law and sports law. Since retiring, I've been able to do a bit more work in terms of representation for Victito, and obviously we'll talk more about that as we go on. So I'll hand over to Elliot at that point.
Okay.
And my name is Elliot Brown. I'm the chair of Victito, one of the founding members, and in essence, my background goes back into the world of medical microbiology, and then into mainstream high-level management, predominantly in the healthcare sector. And I've then moved into the private and have been running a management consultancy company for 12 years now. So I've got a good insight into people management in particular, having seen it on both sides. And I have a real calling towards looking at how people can manage the difficulties that they experience within organizations, often not of their own doing. And that's brought me more and more into looking at how I can support people, hence the evolution of Victito.
Okay. So if you met a stranger down the road and you were about to say to them, Victito is the organization you need to talk to, how would you sell Victito?
An easy one, that is. First of all, we are an organization that will look out for the well-being of that individual, not just about the legal issues that they're dealing with, but also, some of the emotional and psychological issues, and additionally, how we might help them to look at exit strategies from the situation that they're in, and even maybe looking at how they might even start their own organization based on what skill set they have. So we're trying to encompass all the facets of an individual, not just the particular legal challenge that they're going through at the moment. And that's why I think Victito is slightly different to many other organizations. We're definitely not a union. We're very focused on the individual and the totality of that individual, and not just the immediate.
Okay. Well, that sounds like that could cover about 50% of the workers in this country. Everybody has a problem. Everybody has an issue with, it might be their line manager, it might be a co-worker, it might be the boss. They might have an emotional issue, or they might feel hard done by. Maybe they've been unfairly treated. So how can they contact you if they are going through any particular problems?
Rob, you want to take that?
Yeah, principally through our website, which makes it very easy to get hold of us. And I think one of our strengths, if you like, is we respond very quickly to individuals. So we're not treating people as just another faceless inquiry. We build up a very personal approach with them. So by contacting us through the email that's given on our website. And our website has a lot of information about the services we can offer, not just if they've got a problem, but it can also be, if you like, a helpful insurance or a safety net. So it's not all about people with problems, but if there are problems, then we're there to help them. And if I could have a wish for anything, it's the problems that we get, we wish we'd been involved earlier. And that, well, absolutely, because sometimes things, for a variety of reasons, will escalate, and two parties, if you like, become entrenched in their positions. Sometimes it gets to that final point, or someone's about to be dismissed, and then they come looking for our help. And of course, we're always happy to give that. But sometimes we do think, if we'd just been there at the beginning, this might never have happened. And that's a facet of our organization, that we can actually help employers as well as employees, because it's in everybody's interest that a relationship works and is effective and productive. A dysfunctional or conflicting relationship doesn't help anyone, the individual or the employer. So we can help them both, either directly or indirectly.
Okay. When did Victito start? What year did it start?
I think if we looked at the when we were registered on Companies House, it must be in 2017, 18. But we took a long time to really get anything going, because both Rob and I were always getting inquiries from different friends, families, etc., for help or support, and we knew that there was a missing part of the jigsaw in this. So we did set Victito up, but we ended up taking a long time to actually move it on, because we were dealing predominantly with just the issues that we could cope with. Rob was still in full-time employment, so it cost us probably a year or two to settle ourselves down and decide how we would position the business and start to do more marketing of it.
Was there a catalyst? Was there something that happened that made you feel we've got to do this business?
Yes, for me there was, because I've been through some of the trauma that people have suffered themselves, and I think everyone, members of Victito, have had experiences not dissimilar. So there was a drive in myself to say, I wish I had someone out there when I was going through my trauma to actually help me to manage it better and avoid some of the emotional stress and distress that these cause. And that was probably the driver for it, because I certainly didn't have anybody I could pick the phone up to, really. But and a lot of the times when people are struggling within their work setting, all they often need is someone who they can raise the phone up, who actually understands the nuances of that kind of broken relationship. So that's how I would, that was probably the driver for me. And then Rob and the others have had similar issues, and they were perfect partners to join us in that venture.
Okay. All right. Could you give us some examples of red flags that employees need to look out for? What kind of experiences would they undergo, which would mean that it's traumatic for them and they need to speak to you? So we're getting down to detail now.
Okay, I'll kick off with that one. I mean, it's such a variety of things. I think, again, going back to what I was saying, if we were there at the beginning, so some of those early warning signs would be indications of unfair criticism, perhaps by a manager or a senior manager of an individual, and unfair pressures, deadlines, where the relationship starts to show signs of deterioration or tension. And it's a bit like in any relationship, in a marriage, you look back and you see signs when it starts to go wrong. And that's where it's important that both individuals, but also managers, have the confidence to have difficult conversations. And I think that's one of the biggest failings of a lot of middle managers in particular, but also senior managers, is they struggle with having difficult conversations. And to give you an example, I was dealing with a case very recently where a female employee was told she was being dismissed because we don't want part-time staff anymore. And on the face of that, that's unlawful. But what it turned out was that the organization had concerns about that individual's performance, but rather than have that difficult conversation to address issues of performance, somebody uninformed, its senior manager, thought it would be an easier option to say, well, we're not going to have part-timers anymore, so cheerio. And through naivety, that manager actually got the organization into hot water because of a potentially unlawful reason to exit somebody. But had they addressed any concerns about that individual's performance at the outset, hopefully they would have corrected it and that individual would have still been working there. So those sorts of things are the warning signs. When I was saying to Elliot earlier today, one of the concerns I have about all the homeworking that we're all doing now, and a lot of people haven't seen their manager, and their manager hasn't seen employees face to face other than on Zoom things for some considerable time. And if you look at a lot of the casework that we see, poor communication, and particularly where communication is by email, is so open to misinterpretation. Because when you're sitting with someone in a room, or when you're just passing them in the kitchen at work or at the photocopier, you pick up on things. All of those things are lost. Those signals that, John isn't his usual self, or, Kikil is not as friendly as normal, something's up. All of those signs are missed, and that I do have concerns, because I think when COVID is hopefully gone away, homeworking is still going to be a big part of a lot of employment, and I think there is a danger we will miss a lot, and those tensions will arise much more easily through just clumsy wording in emails and a few exclamation marks. I read today of a case at Employment Tribunal where somebody was dismissed for putting too many exclamation marks and question marks in emails to their staff,
Wow.
putting about 4 or 5, and they won 15,000 compensation at tribunal. So silly things like that can be very costly.
Wow.
I think the other thing to add to what Rob said is that I'm quite keen for people to develop the confidence to raise concerns sooner rather than later. As Rob was saying, we see people at the latter stages of the relationship breakdown, when in many respects there's been a whole plethora of that points to them not having a reasonable time at work, and they've held on. They've not said anything. It's until the 1-year appraisal become more confident about raising issues that are affecting how you feel and how how you perform. And maybe some managers will find it difficult to deal with, but whichever way you look at it, at some stage it will affect your career, or it will affect your state of health, etc. So how do we get people to become more confident about raising that they feel are affecting themselves at work?
Another red flag, which has been in the news quite a bit recently from a royal angle, is bullying. Now,
Yep.
what kind of scenarios with bullying have you come across?
Plenty. And certainly, when I was an HR director, I used to come across it a lot. And I think my overall feeling is most examples or most cases of bullying are through clumsy management rather than deliberate, malicious intent, if you like. And I think a lot of particularly middle managers lack the ability to communicate effectively. And that becomes particularly apparent in equality and diversity issues, really. And I think we're paying the price for the legacy of poor equality and diversity training over the years, which was always focused more on the legislation and what you can't do and what you mustn't say, rather than on trying to understand diversity. And give you an example, when I was working in the Northwest and coming from the South, it was like a different land up in Manchester to me, apart from the rain. But there were three of the female staff in my department that had arranged marriages, and I'd never met anyone who'd had an arranged marriage before. So I asked them about it, and another manager outside my department said, "You can't do that. They'll put in a race discrimination claim against you." I said, "Well, why would they do that?" I'm just asking them. I obviously asked them if they are happy to talk about it, and they were delighted, and they were very happy in their marriages. And it gave me an understanding of something I didn't know about before. And I've done similar with an employee who had bipolar disorder. I didn't ever know anyone who'd got bipolar before. And I said, "Would you mind, talking to me about how it affects you, and particularly how it affects you at work?" And he said, "Nobody's ever asked me that before." And he was delighted. And turned out he then came to speak to a group of my HR advisors to talk about it. And that's what's missing. And it's not about, oh, you mustn't ask them about this and you mustn't say that. And people become so paranoid about saying the wrong thing that they don't say the right thing, if you understand what I mean. So, there are lots of examples I can give you in that respect, but they're that sort of, all out of that sort of vein, that communication is the most important part of any manager's skills, really. The ability to communicate with people at all levels in the organization, but to communicate and understand and be empathetic to their team. If you look at, say, football managers know which players to shout at and push hard and get the best out of them, but they also know which players don't respond to that, but they respond to an arm around the shoulder, a quiet word here, a bit of encouragement there. And that's what managers need. But too many managers, when they themselves are under pressure, fall back on kicking the next person down the food chain, if you like, and that's not an effective strategy. And that is where problems arise, because you then get the complaints of bullying, because you get unrealistic deadlines and, you know, too much pressure to do certain things. And that lack of understanding becomes more and more apparent then.
Okay. What about racism as another red flag? How would that be spotted, and how should that be dealt with?
I'll start that one off if that's okay.
Yeah.
Rob, you can fill in if you can for me. Racism. I think the first thing to understand is that unfortunately, there are what we call still a major problem in terms of unconscious bias. Often people don't necessarily appreciate that their behavior to an individual who might be of a different color or you know, religion or whatever is detrimental to how that individual feels about themselves. And that's a history of people being, I suppose, seen as being different or less capable in some cases. And that's a mindset that I believe is wrong, that needs changing, and it's not going to happen overnight. And it's important that individuals, again, we talk about speaking up, that we get people more confident about saying, I don't agree with the way you've been treating me in this particular way. And it's not about pointing directly to necessarily to racism, but you can say, I don't agree and I don't feel comfortable in the way you've dealt with that. And we have to find a way of how we throw the challenge blind from their behavior, because they are, in many respects, the word one would use, they have been conditioned to see certain people in a certain way or to have a particular view about, you know, certain individuals. I know for a fact that most of the white boards of directors, you know, where are there many black guys or black girls? So the assumption is that we're not good enough to be there. And that's almost an unconscious bias, because often it's been dealt with based on a history of them not being given a chance in the first place. Mm. That's how I try to deal with this. And I know that, Rob, you've got your own views about that, but it's still a big problem in many organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I follow on from that, really, in that, again, it's about communication, and whether it's about race or gender or disability, those same issues are the same. People should feel comfortable to say, you know, I don't like the way you look at me, you know, dealing with a sexual harassment case at the moment. And a number of the female staff have complained they don't like the way that the senior manager looks them up and down and makes them feel uncomfortable. But they need to make that known. But of course, you get into that trap then that, well, I can't say that to the senior manager or the director because I might lose my job. Well, they need that assurance, and it's something that organizations like us can give them, that no, you won't lose your job, but maybe that manager doesn't realize they're doing it. And we need to stop it, not instigate a lawsuit straight away. We need to try and stop it. And similarly, in terms of race and particularly cultural differences, again, people need to talk to understand that might make somebody feel uncomfortable, or it might make them embarrassed or not feeling good about coming to work. And it's about educating in that respect that's important. But also, you know, I've seen cases the other way around where people are claiming discrimination, and it's not discrimination. They've done something they shouldn't do, and whatever gender ability, disability, race, they deserve to have that addressed. You know, I can give you examples that way round. So it is about looking at individuals as people, not a particular label, because somebody might feel just as uncomfortable being called ginge because they've got ginger hair. Unless they tell the person who's doing it, no, I don't like being called ginge, they're not going to stop. And that's not a protected characteristic, but it's about people and their interaction in work and communicating.
I think it's really important that we look at the fact that people are frequently afraid to complain or to raise a concern because they are worried about they might lose their job or they might not be considered for promotion. How would you handle that with clients?
Well, again, sort of going back to what I was saying, we can help give them that confidence. In some cases, we will even facilitate that conversation, and not necessarily through formal mediation, although that's something we can do, but the softer informal mediation, sort of go between, and encouraging people to do that, but also giving them the reassurance that at the end of the day, they can't be dismissed for raising a concern, formal or informal, if they do it properly. They haven't got to do it in an aggressive, confrontational way. They've just got to say, you know, I don't like that, or that's making me feel uncomfortable, or I don't think you're treating me fairly. And, you know, all of those sorts of issues apply whatever characteristics people have got.
I think, therefore, your task seems to me that it would be both with the complainant and also the person at the other end who is being complained about. Because let's face it, if you are a boss and there's an employee that seems to always be complaining, at some point, it might not be immediate, it might actually be 6 months or a year down the line, you might decide that this person is the right person to let go because they've caused trouble in the past and they might probably cause that trouble later on. So it seems to me that, you know, you are working therefore with the employer to try and ensure that that doesn't happen later on. So you're having to deal with the two sides of the story or the two parts of the argument, so to speak. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we can be is, if you like, a critical friend to employees and indeed employers, by sometimes saying, well, actually, I think you're wrong here, you know, whether that's the employer or the employee. We've had those conversations with employees because, you know, they might say, oh, here's a draft email I'm going to send to my boss, and it's really offensive and aggressive. And you say to them, well, what are you hoping to achieve from this? Are you hoping to, you know, break the relationship completely, or are you trying to build an effective working relationship? Because if it's the latter, you're not going to do it with that email. Here's a better way of doing it. And that way. And that's not being overly critical of, you know, that hypothetical individual, because sometimes the emotion of a situation means it's helpful to have someone who's a bit detached that can take a look at that and say, well, actually, just take a step back and calm down. And it goes back to the point of saying about the danger of emails, because, you know, probably we've all done it at some time in our lives, sent an email where we should have probably slept on it and had a look in the morning rather than pinging one straight back. But emails are immediate. You know, you type it, press send, and it's gone, and that's it.
Call it back.
Yeah.
I hear you. I hear you. I like a term that you used earlier, informal go-between. That's what you can be, because that's basically saying, we're not going through the formalities of grievance and, everything's got to be, every word has got to be documented or recorded. We're just having an informal chat to see if we can, bridge the gap.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah, trying to resolve differences. Because sometimes if you corner a manager or an organization, they'll become overly defensive. They will fall back on their organizational policies and procedures and say, oh no, we can't do that. You've got to put it in writing and you've got to send it to me in X number of days and I'll reply in Y number of days, and no, you can't record it, and no, you can't do this. And it gets so bureaucratic and officious that it makes it harder to bring those parties together. It just drives them apart. And too many organizations are hostage to their own policies and procedures. They say, oh, we can't do that because our policy doesn't allow it. And you say to them, well, it's your policy. You can change it. You can adapt it. You can bend it. Do it to whatever you need to solve this problem. Don't feel constrained by something your organization has written.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Well, that sounds really good. Elliot?
I would like to say, to add to a bit of what Rob said, is that I strongly believe that there's a greater need for mediation, and as Rob says, the softer go-between, because that is probably the way that you can de-escalate some of the tensions that are going on, and may help to get both sides to become more empathetic about one another's point of view or the issues that an individual is struggling with, whether it be racism or whatever, because often until you sit down to talk to people, you don't really understand what's driving some of their behaviors and why is it that person has taken offense to the way they were treated or how they were being targeted. So there's got to be, organizations got to become a little bit more sensitive to their management style and behaviors and start to accommodate more of a discussion around how their employees feel by the behaviors that they're exhibiting.
Okay. What about if someone comes to you, it's a female, and she's saying that she notices that all the people getting promoted are men, and when it's time for redundancies, they seem to be getting rid of more women. What would you say to that? And how would you talk to the employer?
Do you want to start, Elliot? Or?
Yeah, I'll start this one off. I think that the first thing, if that's the case, often you can see statistics within that organization's HR function to see a trend. So make sure we're starting from a position of evidence. And we talked earlier about red flags. I certainly feel very strongly that people should do their homework on organizations before they join them, to find out what the nuances are, what's the word on the street, etc., if that is at all possible. But going back to answer your question, I think I'll start off by saying we need to talk to the individual and to see whether they have got a case, because that does happen. And it's important that it's not dismissed, and we start to look at how we can, again, get involved with that organization to actually start to talk through what really is happening here. Is this policy which you're pursuing, whether it's redundancy for women or not, doesn't sit right within an employment law perspective? And we will take that discussion on board, both for the individual, who often will be our member, and try to open up that.
Okay. How does one become a member?
Very simple. They get onto our website, have a look at the membership join-in form, and join us. What we're trying to create is a slightly different organization that's more of a community where there's more opportunity to talk about it and get support and insight, and more informed about how people can, you know, help to manage themselves. I'm always a believer in giving people more knowledge and insight so that they can take some ownership for how they, you know, how they go through their working lives. So we're trying to build the organization where there's a lot of experience which can be shared with others. So joining us we're at an early stage in our development, but joining us will be that we'll start to bring on board people who genuinely feel similar to ourselves, that there's a lot more we can do for others who are often going through difficult challenges.
And I believe there's a small membership fee?
Yes, very, very small.
It could work out far more value for money than losing your job or losing your mind if you don't have the support.
Absolutely. I think the other thing to mention is obviously not every situation is fixable. And sometimes people do leave and we will try and negotiate a suitable package there. But what we pride ourselves on is not just trying to address the employment dispute, but address that individual's situation beyond the dispute. So it might be they leave the organization. It might be that they're actually quite damaged by that experience. And part of what we offer is what we call a membership assistance program. A lot of employers have EAPs. We call ours a MAP. And part of our membership subscription is people that need it have got access to 24-hour telephone support from a counsellor, and if they need it, up to 6 face-to-face sessions from a qualified counsellor. That's all confidential. So Elliot and I wouldn't know that what happens in that discussion. We'd just give people the contacts for the service. Plus, there's all sorts of online information in terms of financial information. You know, where do you go if you've got your neighbour giving you hassle over the fence and things like that? That's all there. So, you know, we're not experts in boundary disputes and divorce proceedings and things like that, but we know someone who is, and they can get that information through the membership.
Okay. All right. Well, we must say at this point you don't deal with divorces, yeah? This is not part of your remit.
No.
Unless they happen to be working together in the same firm. Well,
yeah, that happens, doesn't it? And yeah.
Okay, so the client who comes to you will have access to a counsellor 24 hours. That's really quite amazing, because you started off saying that, yes, you look out for the emotional health of the person. So it's not just about hearing the complaint and trying to do something about it. You're looking at the whole person, you know, where they've come from, what experiences they've had. And there also seems to be an aftercare service, which I love. The fact that, you know, after the situation has been resolved, whether they stay in work or not, you actually help them in terms of their career progression afterwards. So that could be whether they stay at work, whether they're going for promotion, or whether they have to leave, you know, in terms of finding a job elsewhere or even starting a business. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, we think it's essential, really, because, you know, there are members. They're not just someone coming to us because of an employment dispute. And Elliot and I are not psychologists or counsellors, so we've got that facility that's bolted on to and part of their membership. But other things like helping people prepare to get another job if they have left the organization. It might be, 10, 20 years since they last had an interview or last wrote their CV or things like that. And obviously our backgrounds lend themselves to say, well, let's have a look and maybe it'd be better to do this, or we'll give you a mock interview online, just to give people a bit of confidence that, there is life after their last job.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. Okay, so we need to get the word out.
We need to, because the other thing that we do is obviously we try to help people who are genuinely entrepreneurial, because my background is management and, setting up companies, setting up, businesses or running them. And therefore we have several of us, myself and in particular Claire, who've got this whole package to help people to say, okay, I've got a business idea. Let's have a look at, we can help you structure a business plan to see whether it's got legs and help you to actually, support you on that journey. Because that's another thing that never happens. People go down blindly. Without actually taking we use that deep dive as to
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, the last thing I want to ask is, let's say, 3 or 4 years down the line, what are you hoping that Victito would have achieved?
That's quite a hard one to answer. I mean, purely from a personal point of view, I would say, and it sounds a bit twee, to have made a difference to as many individuals as we could. And both when I was working as an HR director, but also now working with Victito, you get a great deal of personal satisfaction by solving somebody's problem.
You do.
One of the first big cases I did with Victito was somebody who'd actually been dismissed, and I helped him with his appeal, and I got him his job back, and under a different manager, because there was clearly a tension between him and a manager. And from being told he was useless and, we didn't want him around, he's now excelling, because he's working with a different manager who he's built up a relationship with. His performance has gone through the roof, and that's fine. And those things are just, I think, great, and it gives you a great deal of satisfaction. So if we can have made a difference, then personally, from my point of view, that's why I'm in it, really.
I'm the same. More importantly, what I would like to think that we achieve is a different way of giving people support than just hanging them out and leaving them there to dry, as we tend to do. How do we create almost like a Victito community that is there to help people and to use all of that knowledge and experience and and service understanding to actually look after those individuals, not just the end of a difficult journey, but before, so that they're more informed in how to handle racism or bullying or whatever these issues are, and similarly be able to give organizations some feedback about how they what's the outcome from some of their poor practices, that we can actually be a lot more informative on both sides.
Do you have a legal department?
Yes.
You do. Okay. And what does Victito mean?
All right, that's a good one. It means support. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one, because I did think you might get around to that. life and subsistence. That's the real meaning for it. And we chose it after a long debate. One of our directors, I think it was Nicola, wasn't it? We were looking for something that embodied the way we think. This is not about building a business for making money at all. All our work is done for free. We do this as a matter of course. £12.50 a month doesn't pay bills. So
yeah, of course.
set this up purely because we have a sort of a calling to do something different, and we've got the like-minded people who are prepared to put in an awful lot of time to make this happen. Life and support is the term.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for doing this. And I know that there will be many people who will appreciate your work, and we will certainly point people in your direction when we know that there is a need. So thank you so much. And this is where we finish our interview.
Okay, thanks very much, Dawn.
Thank you. Good luck to Victito.
Fashion and furnishings.
VU Designs. Fashion and furnishings.
Fashion and furnishings.
VU